Commonly asked econ questions for micro and macroeconomics. Sorry for the late start. There's just some technical issues to figure out. But yeah, so we'll just jump right into it. So the first question is, opportunity cost occurs because of a producer's need to A, limit resources, B, protect resources, C, allocate resources, or D, spend resources. And so again, just a quick review, what is opportunity cost? Is essentially saying that when we make a decision, what we give up is the next best alternative of what we could have done had we not made that decision. And so from a producer's point of view, opportunity cost is really important and crucial to consider when they have to determine what do they want to use what they have to produce. Do they want to produce good X or good Y or good Z? And when they produce good X, how much of good Y and good Z do they give up? So looking at the answer choices, it becomes pretty clear that A is not going to be the right answer, right? A producer doesn't need to limit resources. They have limited resources, and so they have to work within the boundaries of those limited resources. B says protect resources, but a producer's aim is not to protect the resources from being used. They want to use the resources, they just don't know how to use those resources in the best possible way. C says allocate resources, and that's exactly right. A producer faces limited resources, and they have to decide, where do I want to allocate these limited resources to produce goods? So C looks like a good answer. And finally, D, producers need to spend resources, and producers want to spend resources, but opportunity cost is not the driver for that want. The driver for that want is just a profit motivation. So it's not really going to be a need to spend resources that we're looking at. So C is going to be the best answer here. We can take a look at the previous tutor's answer. And the previous tutor said that in economics, the opportunity cost is a concept which is widely used in the economic system. The opportunity cost is showing the opportunity lost because it tells the loss of an individual or a company that comes from selecting an alternative by rejecting the other alternatives. In simple words, if we can have multiple options or alternatives, and we need to choose one out of them all, and the other alternatives, which are not chosen by an individual, are an opportunity cost of that alternative. That was a little bit confusing, but I think I get what they're saying. For example, in a particular period, either we can watch TV or study or play games. In this scenario, watching TV and playing games are the opportunity cost of study time. The main reason behind this is the scarcity, so we need to best utilize them. So we can say that the opportunity cost occurs because of a producer's need to allocate resources, therefore option C is the correct option. Now, it's a good explanation. I just want to point out that in this particular scenario that they give, where in a particular period of time, we can either watch TV or study or play games, which means you can only do one of the three. The opportunity cost of doing one of them is not both of the other options. It's the next best option. So let's say I get enjoyment of 10 utility out of watching TV, and I get 9 utility out of playing games, and I get 8 utility out of studying and getting good grades. In that sense, if I choose to watch TV, the opportunity cost is only the utility I gave up from not playing games. So a cost of 9 utility. It is not the sum of both the studying utility of 8 plus the game utility of 9 of 17. That's not my opportunity cost, right? It's the next best alternative. So let's clarify that really quickly. Good explanation. Just want to clarify that opportunity cost only refers to the next best alternative, not all possible alternatives. In the TV scenario, if we gain the most utility out of watching TV, second most out of games, and third most out of studying and getting good grades, then the opportunity cost of watching TV is only utility you give up from not playing games. Okay, so we can mark that as correct though. They got C as well, just a little addendum to that answer choice. Next question. Which of the following are most likely classified by economists as consumer durable goods? A, food and clothing, B, drugs, toys, magazines, and books, C, automobiles and furniture, or D, stocks and bonds. So there's two elements to this definition. First is a consumer good. And what we mean by consumer good is simply a good that consumers are buying pretty often in the marketplace. It's not like a financial asset. It's not anything, complex. It's just regular goods that we think of every day. And the second component is durable, and that's contrasted with non-durable goods or perishable goods. And a durable good is simply a good that you can use multiple times without really using up the good. It's not single use, it's reusable, more permanent of a good that you use. You don't buy it repeatedly over a short period of time. So taking a look at those two definitions, we can take a look at these answer choices. A says food and clothing. So food in particular, we would consider a perishable or single-use good, a non-durable good. So that's going to eliminate that from the answer choice right away. And clothing is somewhere in between durable and non-durable. B says drugs, toys, magazines, and books. And so some of these you could consider durable goods, maybe toys and books and magazines. Drugs, you use a certain amount of drugs. You can't use those again, so that's non-durable. So it's not a great answer choice, so you can take a look at the other one still. C says automobiles and furniture, and we can see that in contrast with answer choices A and B, automobiles and furniture are much more long-lasting, durable goods that consumers buy once and then use over a long period of time. Right? You don't buy a car every week. You buy a car every 10 years or 15 years maybe. And so that's definitely a good example of a consumer durable good. So we're going to go with that most likely. And D says stocks and bonds, but again, we don't consider those consumer goods. So that's not going to be the right answer here. So C is going to be the best answer. And taking a look at the previous tutor, the previous tutor said that based on the time of using a particular good, goods are mainly classified into two main types known as durable and non-durable goods. All of the goods that have a short lifespan fall under a non-durable good category. On the other side, those goods that have a long lifespan come under durable goods. In other words, durable goods are those goods that are not consumed completely in single use and provide utility over time. All of the goods given in the options are not considered as durable because they have a limited time span, except automobiles and furniture. Therefore, option C is correct. Yeah, definitely, I buy that. I was in agreement there, so nothing really to add here. Okay, great answer. And mark that as correct. Moving on to the next question. Fill in the blank. Inflation causes money to blank its value over time. So remember that inflation simply refers to rising prices. What that essentially means is if prices are going up and the supply of money isn't, or all prices universally are going up, then the value of a single dollar is falling because the purchasing power has gone down, right? If, on average, goods used to cost $5. With $5 in my pocket, I could buy one of any good on average. And then if inflation happens and we average all the prices and it inflates to $7 and I still have $5, even though the nominal amount of money I have is still $5, because all the prices have gone up by 40%, the value of my money has actually declined because I can buy less than one of every good now. And so that changing in prices caused by inflation causes money to lose its value or decrease in value over time. So that's going to be the right answer here. Let's take a look. At the previous tutor's answer. So they said that, as we know, inflation is the increase in the price of goods and services over a particular period in the economy. The money supply is the total stock of currency in the economy at a particular period. The real money supply is the ratio of the money supply to the price. In the case of inflation, real money supply decreases. In the case of inflation, price increases, which means the income or money that is with people to spend on goods and services, also known as the purchasing power, reduces. So we can say that inflation causes money to fall, therefore the blank can be filled with the term lose. Some grammar issues, but the ideas are correct. So mark that as correct. Next question, which type of account will typically have the highest interest rate? A, savings account, B, certificate of deposit, C, money market account, or D, checking account. So first thing to note is that all of these accounts are not really investment accounts. They're more savings accounts. Well, savings account has a different name, but they're places where people are just putting their money to earn a certain level of interest over time, but they're not very risky. So what is going to cause these accounts to defer an interest rate? It's going to defer mostly in ease of transferability of the money or liquidity of the money. If you have a savings account, or sorry, let's start with checkings account. If you have a checkings account, it's a very liquid account. You can deposit and withdraw money whenever you want. You can deposit $1,000 today and take it out tomorrow. And so with that kind of liquidity, the bank isn't going to be able to really do much with that kind of money, right? They're going to be more hesitant to loan out all that money because they don't know how much of that money are you going to withdraw from your account and take away from them, and then they won't have those assets in their systems for when loaners are going to come and borrow money. So the less liquid an account is, the higher interest rate a bank will provide you because they can do more with that money, and because they want to convince you to save your money in less liquid accounts so they can make more money. And so the higher interest rate is meant to attract you to those types of accounts. So the least liquid type of account on this list is going to be a certificate of deposit, which is a time deposit where you put in the money. It's like a savings account, except you can't withdraw that money for a specific amount of time. There's a date, maybe 6 months, where within those period of those 6 months, that money you can't take out. And so a certificate of deposit is going to be the least liquid because you're locked into that account. And as a result, you're going to get higher interest rates to reward you for saving in this very illiquid account. And so we can take a look at the answer choice to see if B is what the previous tutor chose as well. So the previous tutor said the savings account is a kind of deposit account which is open with a bank or other financial institution, and banks do provide a modest level of interest to the account holder. A checking account is a deposit account which is more flexible than a savings account and is mainly used in day-to-day transactions, so it is also known as a transactions account. Money market account is a type of savings account that is less flexible at a higher interest rate compared to the savings account. On the other hand, the certificate of deposit is also known as a time deposit, which is deposited by the person for a fixed in time interval, and for that, banks pay a higher interest rate. Therefore, option B is the correct option. So, good answer here. Nothing really to add, and we can mark that as correct. Next question says, which best explains how contractionary policies can hamper economic growth? 1 says aggregate demand increases, 2 says consumer debt increases, 3 says disposable income increases, and 4 says consumer confidence decreases. And so what we know about contractionary policy is that we believe that there's a situation where there's on this aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. Whoa. Not sure what's going on here. Let's try and fix this. Give me one moment, guys. Why is my mouse moving? Try this. Okay, so let me do that. Okay, and bear with me. I'll try this one more time. Okay, not really sure what that was all about, but okay. So, contractionary economic policy, if you look at the aggregate demand Okay, can't draw now. One more moment, guys. I'll start drawing with my mouse. So for the dynamic aggregate demand model, we have our short run aggregate supply curve here. Sorry, I apologize for that. And then our long run aggregate supply curve here with full potential GDP. And then we have aggregate demand here. Contractionary policy is simply saying, well, what if our aggregate demand is actually over here, right? And so we have real GDP, actual GDP is over here, but long-run GDP is over here. What does that mean? It basically means the economy is growing too fast. It's growing at an unsustainable pace. And so what you would want to do here is engage in contractionary policy, which would aim to shift the aggregate demand curve back to this original point where you would have an intersection with the short-run aggregate supply curve on the long-run aggregate supply curve. And so is indeed the goal of contractionary policy to hamper economic growth, and there's several ways you can do that. There's two ways: are fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy will be something along the lines of increasing taxes or decreasing government spending. And so in that sense, if we were to increase taxes, we would see that the amount of money that people have, their disposable income has gone down, and so they won't be able to spend as much money, and that's going to drive down demand. Another way you can see is decreased government spending. Well, if the government spends less, that means there's less government money going into the economy. People will make less money as a result, and that also decreases their disposable income. And so in that sense, that's the fiscal side of things. Then you have the monetary policy side of things, where you could have the Fed deciding to, if the Fed is trying to decrease the aggregate demand through monetary policy, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to decrease the interest rate, so that people are going to be less inclined to increase the interest rate. So they would want to increase the interest rate. Increase the interest rate so that the savers are going to save less, save more money and put more money into the bank accounts, and then borrowers will borrow less because high interest rates demand higher payments on principal payments, and so borrowers will borrow less money, and that means less investment spending. And that will also be a way to decrease disposable income because more money goes into savings and less into spending. And so through any of these policies, the end goal you're trying to see is a decrease in disposable income so that overall consumer spending and investment goes down. And so 3 is going to be the right answer here. The best explanation for why contractionary policy hampers economic growth is because it decreases disposable income. And so the next thing we can see is the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor said 3 as well, disposable income decreases, and they said that contractionary fiscal policy involves explicit government actions which either decreases government spending or increases the tax rate. Whereas contractionary monetary policy involves the central bank reducing the money supply in the market to combat inflation. Really quickly, so we can see why does decrease in the money supply lead to increased interest rate. We have interest on, this is the money market graph, we have interest on the y-axis, quantity of money on the x-axis, and we have our money supply as a vertical line, it's just one number, and then we have our demand for money. So we can see that if we want to raise the interest rate, what we'll do is we'll shift the aggregate supply curve, the money supply to the left, and that gives us a new equilibrium interest rate that is higher than the old equilibrium interest rate down here. And so that high interest rate is what is going to shift the aggregate demand to the left. And so if we keep that in mind, we'll see that that's what they mean by reducing the money supply to combat inflation. Next, contraction policies, both fiscal or monetary, are focused on reducing the aggregate demand in the economy by decreasing the spending capability or capacity to consumers that subsequently leads to a reduction in the rate of inflation. The measures adopted in these policies decrease the disposable income of the consumers, which contracts their spending capacity and leads to a reduction in aggregate demand. So that's a good answer, and we can just mark that as correct. All right, moving on to the next question. So the next question says, in a free market system, price controls can include both price floors and which of the following? So price controls, again, government intervention into a certain market and saying this is either how high or how low prices can go. A price floor is this is the lowest price can go. And then on the other hand, we also have price ceilings, which is this is the highest price can go. So that's the main kind of price controls we can see. The second answer choice is equilibriums. And again, a price control is not going to be, equilibrium is not a type of price control. It doesn't really make sense to think of equilibrium as a price control. Equilibrium is just where a market with no price controls ends up. And so that's what we mean. Third, constraints. And it's unclear what constraints really refers to. That's not really an economic term. And so specifically for price controls, we can view both price floors and price ceilings as technically constraints on what the price can be. But that price controls by itself does not necessarily imply constraints, right? There's specific terms we use to refer to those things. And so ceilings is going to be the best answer here. All of the above will qualify. So 1 is the best answer. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor said, ceilings as well. In a free market, the unhindered interaction of supply and demand establishes the equilibrium at which the market price and quantity are determined. However, there is a differential in the respective bargaining power of consumers and producers. This often creates a situation in which the welfare of one market agent compromises the welfare of others. To prevent this from happening and or to enhance the welfare of consumers and or producers, the government imposes price ceilings and or floors in the market. A price ceiling defines the maximum price that can be charged for a good or service and is binding only when imposed below the market equilibrium. It is imposed by the government to protect consumers from extremely high prices. A price floor, on the other hand, defines the minimum price that can be charged for a good or service and is binding only when imposed above the market equilibrium. That's true. It is imposed by the government to protect suppliers from extremely low prices. But yeah, it's a pretty good answer. And we can mark that as correct and move on to the next question. Next question says, for an individual operating in a competitive market, marginal revenue equals A, marginal cost, which is greater than average revenue for all levels of output, B, average revenue and the price for all levels of output, C, average revenue, which is greater than the price level for all levels of output, or D, average revenue, the price and marginal cost for all levels of output. And so what we have here is saying in a perfectly competitive market, where is marginal revenue? What does marginal revenue equal? And so in a perfectly competitive market, we know that marginal revenue and the demand curve are one and the same. The price you get is the marginal revenue of each good. And so it's not like a monopolistic competition or a monopoly or an oligopoly graph where you have a separate marginal revenue curve and a demand curve. It's just the same demand curve. In that sense, we know that any marginal revenue we receive will be the same as any average revenue because marginal revenue is the same, and all firms in competitive markets are price takers. What that means is the demand curve is horizontal, right? For an individual firm, it'll look something like this. And let me see if I can. I don't think my board is working once more. I can. So, interesting. Okay, well, and it looks like we have the same glitch as before. Well, anyways, so what I'm trying to say is that let's try and reset this one more time. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that the price taker situation in a perfectly competitive market means that all firms face the same price level. They don't have an option to decide whether or not what price they want to charge. And so there's perfectly elastic demand. You can't really change the price. So average revenue is going to be equal to margin revenue. We have D is equal to marginal revenue, which is also equal to average revenue. And so that's going to be price level for all levels of output. And so what does this really match up to in our answer choices? And the correct answer would be B. For an individual firm operating in a competitive market, margin revenue equals average revenue and the price for all levels of output. We can see that here, right? And so that's going to be our final answer here. And the explanation that the previous tutor gives says that an individual firm operating in a competitive market acts as a price taker. This means it can sell as much as it can at the given market price. Due to this price-taking characteristic of a competitive firm, each additional unit it sells results in revenue equal to market price. The revenue from each additional unit sold is called marginal revenue. So with respect to competitive firms, marginal revenue is equal to price. As we know, that average revenue is always equal to price. Since in cases of competitive firms, marginal revenue is equal to price, which is equal to average revenue, therefore marginal revenue is also equal to average revenue. Thus, for an individual competitive firm, marginal revenue equals average revenue and the price for all levels of output. Hence, the correct answer choice is B. So good. And we can mark that as correct. Okay, next question. Which of these is most likely the U.S. government's aim in taxing imported goods? 1, to prevent the nascent industries from foreign competition. 2, to eliminate the reliance on foreign imports. 3, to negatively impact international trade. Or 4, to reduce demand for U.S. exports. Yeah, I really apologize for this mouse movement. I have no idea what's going on here. When we have taxation on imported goods, what we call that is a tariff, right? I think this is to spare you guys from my drawing with my mouse. We can look up what a tariff graph does. So tariff, international trade graph. And so this is a pretty, not advanced necessarily, but there's a lot of things going on in this graph. This is a great example right here. And so what we think about in terms of why we have tariffs really has to come from an understanding of both the, can I paste this? Yeah, here we go. It's come from an understanding of the two perspectives, the domestic economy and the world economy. Let me go back to the question, right? And so, in this case, let's say our domestic economy, it looks like is the United Kingdom, and then the world economy, we'll say, is the EU, the European Union. And so, what the thing is that the domestic economy and the world economy face different factors of production. They face different consumers, and so there's going to be differences between the domestic economy and the world economy. In the domestic economy, we might have an equilibrium given by the domestic supply plus the domestic demand, and that gives us our domestic price level of up here at what we would call equilibrium price, right? And yet, because we live in a globalized world, the price that we face is not given by the domestic economy. The price we face is given by the world economy. And the world economy might have a different equilibrium point, which results in a lower price given by P1. And so we can think of it as two scenarios. One, if the United Kingdom were to completely isolate itself from the rest of the world and trade with nobody, they would have equilibrium price where supply and demand intersect up here. However, in the real world, where they do engage on the world market and they do take the price level given by worldwide interactions of markets, then they're going to have to deal with a lower price at P1, which is much lower than the equilibrium price. And so what does that mean for the United Kingdom? Well, at this low price,
the domestic suppliers in the United Kingdom only supply Q1 quantity of goods. And so that's the supply that is produced in the United Kingdom drops significantly, and producer surplus drops significantly, right? It used to be this giant triangle, now it's this tiny triangle. And second, we see that at a lower price, the consumers in the United Kingdom are going to want to buy a lot more than they used to. They used to want to buy the equilibrium quantity, now they want to buy Q4. And so this gap between Q1 and Q4 is made up by imports. We buy it from international countries who produce these goods and have extra goods because they can produce at low cost. And so Q1 quantity is still produced by domestic consumers, and then Q1 to Q4 quantity is produced by international producers. So that's what happens if we just let the free market reign on an international scale, assuming that this is what the domestic economy and the global economy looks like. And so who benefits here? Well, the consumers benefit tremendously because the prices have gone down and they can afford to buy these goods from other producers in international countries. And so their producer surplus has increased from this triangle over here to this giant triangle over here. Meanwhile, the losers are the domestic producers, right? The domestic producers used to produce this much producer surplus, now they have this much. And so the United Kingdom's government might look at the situation and say, we have an interest in not just promoting the surplus of consumers, but also protecting domestic producers from the impact of globalization. And so what they'll do then is they'll raise tariffs. And so tariffs effectively increase the price that the world price is paying. If the world price used to be P1, now it's P2. It's the world price plus the tariff amount. And so what this does is it expands the producer surplus segment by area 1, and it reduces the welfare loss by 2 and 4, and you have government tariff revenue given by area 3. And so this main goal of this tariff is to expand producer surplus by area 1 so that the domestic producers are still protected from globalization. So looking at the answer choices, we can see that answer choice 1 is the most adequate to explain this very complex model, right? The most likely reason the government aims in taxing imported goods is to prevent nascent industries from being basically suffering from foreign competition. And so we can take a look at the previous tutor's answer to check our answer. So the previous tutor also said 1, it stated that trade barriers are government-imposed regulations on international trade. Trade barriers such as taxing imported goods or setting import quotas are employed to protect domestic industries, especially infant ones, from foreign competition. The primary aim of the U.S. government in taxing imported goods would be import substitution to promote domestic industries. A tax that is imposed on imports known as a tariff is a regulatory instrument to encourage domestic industries and also provide a source of income to the state. That's a good answer. Review the tariff graph for better understanding. Mark that as correct, and we can move on to the next question. The next question says, which is one way a market economy affects the lives of private citizens? 1, citizens cannot choose their own careers. 2, citizens do not have to pay for their housing. 3, citizens have little freedom and independence. And 4, citizens can change jobs relatively easily. And so a lot of the first 3 answer choices might be seen in more socialist or basically more command economy type markets or economies, right? You have a central body that determines who does what, where do you work, it provides resources for where you live, and a lot of decisions are made for you by the central decision-making body. In a market economy, which is much more capitalist in nature, you see that wherever jobs are is really dependent on which industries have a surplus of labor, which industries have a shortage of labor, and so on and so forth, which ones are growing the fastest, which ones are growing slowly or declining. So if you let the market decide those things, then citizens have an option to change their jobs relatively easily because they can simply look for other opportunities and they don't have to seek the approval of a command kind of organization or group that kind of decides everything for you. So 4 is going to be the right answer here. And so we can take a look at the previous tutor's answer, and they also said 4. You say that a market economy is a type of economic system driven by the forces of demand and supply that arise from the free and unhindered interaction of producers and consumers. Such an economy is unadulterated by third-party interventions and state control. The lives of private citizens hence become a derivative of their own actions. A socialized or a command economic system, on the other hand, supports its citizens in their economic needs at the cost of their economic freedom. A planned economy grants negligible economic liberty and independence to its members, and its citizens cannot choose their own careers with great flexibility. A market economy, however, advocates economic liberalization and hence allows its members to change jobs relatively easily. And so we can say good, and we mark that as correct. Okay, the next question says, in general, in order for a price decrease to cause a decrease in total revenue, demand must be A, elastic, B, inelastic, or C, unit elastic, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this. So we can draw this out here. So elasticity first and foremost. Again, apologies for what will be a worse handwriting experience. Elasticity is given by percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. And so we have those two things telling us elasticity. And the other thing we want to know is what's the equation of total revenue? Total revenue is given by price times quantity. Okay, so if a price decrease causes a decrease in total revenue, what does that mean? So we know that there's going to be a negative effect on price, which means a loss in revenue, and there's going to be a positive change in quantity because the law of demand tells us when prices go down, quantity of demand goes up, and so that there's a positive pressure on revenue. And so if total revenue goes down, that must mean that the negative pressure from a fall in prices was greater than the positive pressure from an increase in quantity, right? And so that means the bottom, the denominator must be the larger one of these two variables. So if the change in price is larger than the change in quantity, that means that elasticity must be less than 1. The denominator is larger than the numerator. And so in the interpretation of elasticity, we know that elasticity less than 1 is what we would categorize as inelastic demand. And so the correct answer here would be B. In general, in order for a price decrease to cause a decrease in total revenue, demand must be inelastic. So let's take a look at what the previous tutor said. The previous tutor said elasticity is a concept which is used to show the responsiveness of quantity due to a change in price in numerical terms. So that's right here. The elasticity of demand also affects the total revenue because total revenue is nothing but the product of price and quantity. If the elasticity of demand is elastic, then the percentage change in quantity is more than percentage change in price, so a fall in price leads to a rise in total revenue. If the elasticity of price is inelastic, then the percentage change in quantity is less than the percentage change in price, so a fall in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. Therefore, option B is the correct option. So, great. That's a good answer. Nothing to add there. We can move on to the next question as well. So the next question says, an economic incentive is best described as something that A, benefits producers or consumers when taking action, B, pushes producers or consumers to act on the government's behalf, C, motivates producers or consumers to take action, or D, forces producers or consumers to act in a certain way. So an incentive is, again, something that is meant to motivate certain action, right? We think of it as it's not a law, it's not a requirement, it is simply something to nudge you towards making a certain decision. A says is economic incentive benefits producers or consumers when taking action. And so it's not necessarily that's the case, right? You could have a negative incentive, an incentive not to do something. For example, a tax imposed on cigarettes is an incentive not to buy cigarettes, right? And so that's not something that benefits consumers, that's something that hurts consumers, but is motivating them to take a certain type of action. So it's not a question of the positive or negative nature of the incentive, right? So A is not going to be right. B says pushes producers, consumers to act on the government's behalf, and so it's not really acting on government's behalf. It's simply to behave in a way that government believes would be optimal, right? And it also doesn't have to be an incentive given by government. It could be an incentive given by a private party. So there's some inaccuracies with that answer statement, so we're not going to go with B. C says something that motivates producers and consumers to take action. That's what we've been saying from the beginning, and that seems like something that would be a good answer. So maybe that would be the final answer here. But we can take a look at D, which is forces producers or consumers to act in a certain way. And again, an incentive is just that. It's a nudge. It is not a requirement. It is not a law. It is not a mandate. And so to say incentive forces you to act in a certain way would be inaccurate. So C is going to be the best answer here. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor said, an incentive is, in general terms, is anything which boosts the person to do something. In simple words, if a person increases their work efficiency and quantity to get something like money, then that money is an incentive. On the other hand, the economic incentive is an incentive which is in monetary terms only to take certain actions by people. So we can say that an economic incentive is best described as something that motivates producers or consumers to take action. Therefore, option C is the correct option. I mean, for this one, it's really just an understanding of the definition. I don't think there's anything wrong with this definition per se, so we can just mark that as correct and move on. The next question says, which economic indicator describes the process of generally declining prices? 1 says inflation, 2 says deflation, 3 says gross domestic product, 4 says recession, and 5th says unemployment. Yeah, this is a very straightforward definition question. If we know inflation is increasing prices, we can even infer without knowing this from memory that deflation will refer to a process of declining prices. And so D2 is going to be the right answer. Deflation describes the process of generally declining prices. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. The previous tutor said economic indicators are used to know about the economy. There are various economic indicators, and each provides different economic interpretation, like the unemployment rate, inflation, deflation, gross domestic product, etc. The continuous increase in the price of goods and services over a particular period at a given level of price is known as inflation. The gross domestic product is an indicator of the growth of the economy because it measures the total production of goods and services. Recession is showing the situation of decline in economic activity. Unemployment is an indicator of total unemployed people in the economy at a particular point in time. And the deflation is an indicator that shows a continued fall in prices, which is exactly opposite to the inflation indicator. Therefore, option 2 is the correct option. And yep, it's just a definition question, so it should be pretty straightforward. The next question says, an increase in the demand for bubblegum might be caused by A, the fact that lying is now an unpopular activity. Not sure how that relates. B, the fact that blowing bubbles is now a popular activity. Or C, a decrease in the number of people chewing gum. An increase in the demand for bubblegum basically means there must be a positive influence on one of the determinants of demand. And so we know that one of the determinants of demand is consumer sentiments or consumer attitudes. And so if blowing bubbles is now a popular activity, then consumer sentiment or attitude towards bubblegum has increased, right? More people want to buy bubblegum because they want to be able to blow bubbles. And so that would be an explanation for why the demand for bubblegum might go up. So B is going to be the right answer here, and we can take a look at the previous tutor's answer. The previous tutor said, an increase in the demand for bubblegum might be caused by, they're just repeating the question. An increase in demand arises when there's an increase in quantity demanded due to factors other than price. Therefore, when the blowing bubbles are now a popular activity, that causes more demand for bubblegum, leads to more demand for bubblegum at the prevailing price. This is due to the increase in popularity of blowing bubbles, but there's no increase in demand due to price changes. Therefore, option B is the correct answer. Just want to note that increasing an increase in demand refers to a increase in quantity demanded at all price levels, right? And so that's probably a better way of phrasing what the law, the way we understand demand shifting. And so that's just the one thing I want to correct, but otherwise it's a good answer. The next question says, aggregate demand is composed of expenditure components that include consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. We know that this equation is also similar to GDP. Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. And so all of those things are expenditure components that are included in aggregate demand. And so we say this is all of the above. And again, net exports we want to note is exports minus imports. We just call that net exports. So with that in mind, again, this is a very just definition-based question, something that you'll just have to know. And so we can take a look at the previous answers. The previous tutor said that the aggregate demand is the total quantity demanded by all the consumers in the economy at a particular point in time. When we draw the aggregate demand on a graph, then it shows the inverse relationship between the price and the GDP. Aggregate demand is the sum of 4 expenditure components known as consumption, government spending, investment, and the net export. So you can say the option E is the correct answer. Good. Mark that as correct. And we can move on to the next question. The next question says, how does the increase in income affect spending on necessities and luxuries? A says that as income increases, spending on luxuries increases dramatically, but spending on necessities increases slowly. B says as income increases, spending on luxuries increases dramatically, and spending on necessities remains unchanged. C says that as income increases, spending on luxuries increases slowly, but spending on necessities increases dramatically. And D says income increases, spending on necessities increases dramatically, and spending on luxuries remains unchanged. So let's break this down. This is trying to break down the income effect. How is spending affected when you have an increase in income? So the two kinds of goods we're dealing with here are necessities and luxuries, and they're simply ways of looking at responsiveness of goods to income change. We know that necessities are things that are relatively irresponsive to income change, relatively inelastic demand. A reason for that is even with low income, you're still buying most of the necessities you need. By definition, these are purchases that you almost need to have in order to survive. And so an increase in income is not going to cause a significant increase in necessity spending because your necessity spending was never that low to begin with. This is contrasted with luxuries, which are goods that you only buy when you have excess income. And so when you have experience an increase, when you have little income, you most likely aren't spending your money on luxuries. And when you experience an income increase, you're going to find that your luxury spending is going to increase dramatically. And so this is something that we are going to be looking for in an answer choice. An answer choice that says spending on luxuries is going to go up very highly, very, very dramatically, whereas spending on necessities is only going to increase a little bit. And so A seems to be perfect and it fits that bill well. As income increases, spending on luxuries increases dramatically, but spending on necessities increases slowly. So the next question says, so the previous tutor said that as we know, necessary goods are those goods which we require to live, like food or medicine. Necessities remain the same with a change in income or a small change occurring in spending on necessities. On the other hand, luxurious goods are those goods whose demand is increasing more than proportional to the increase in their income. These types of goods are also known as superior goods or upmarket goods. It means in case of increased income, the spending on luxuries increases more than income, but spending on necessities increases slowly. Therefore, option A is the correct option. Mark that as correct. There's no issues there. And we can move on to the next question. The next question says, which of the following conditions is most indicative of recovery? Assuming recovery means recovery from a recession. So the next question says, the answer choices say, the economy has stopped shrinking. B says the economy begins to peak. C says the economy has passed the trough. And D says the economy is growing again. And so, we can think of this in terms of the business cycle, which is simply given by something that looks like this. If you see this, the general trend of the economy, we have business cycles that go like this, right? So we have peaks right here, we have troughs right here, we have declines here, and we have recoveries or expansion here. So indicative of recovery is the point in time where we're coming back from the trough and you have this growth now. So which one of these answer choices best fits that? A says the economy has stopped shrinking. So that refers to somewhere like on the trough, which is not indicative of recovery. recovery is somewhere like right here in the middle of this process of going and increasing, right? B says the economy begins to peak, so we know that's actually the end of recovery, the start of recession most likely, so that's not going to be the right answer. C says the economy is past the trough, and past is good, but if we just pass the trough, it's unclear if we're going to continue to see this increase in growth, or we're going to see it drop a little bit more and then go back up. And so passing the trough does not necessarily indicate recovery, a strong recovery at least. And D says the economy is growing again, and that applies this upward trend you see here. So that might be the best answer choice to look at in terms of predicting what recovery looks like. So D is the best answer here. And take a look at the previous year's answer. And they said that in the business cycle, recovery is a particular phase that comes after a recession. In the recovery phase, the economy starts increasing its output level. The indicators showing the recovery phase of the economy include high growth in GDP, employment, profits, etc. It's in the mid of the trough, the lowest possible economic position of the economy, and the peak of the highest possible economic position of the economy. So the conditions which are most indicative of recovery is that the economy is growing again, therefore option D is the correct option. Mark that as good, and we can mark that as correct. Next question says, why do monopolies and oligopolies benefit producers over consumers? And so the answer choices are A, companies control prices through demand, B, competition is driven by factors other than price, C, demand influences production more than when the competition is less, or D, few producers can generally control prices. So we want to clarify, a monopoly is a situation where there's a single producer for an entire market of goods, and an oligopoly is where there's only a few producers for an entire market of goods. This is contrasted with a perfectly competitive market where there's theoretically infinite or so many producers that no producer has price setting power. And so let's look up a graph for monopoly really quick. So this is good. So we see here that in a perfectly competitive market, we would see that this market would operate at point C, where demand is intersecting marginal cost, and so that's the perfectly competitive equilibrium. And with a monopoly, because they have pricing power, their marginal revenue is different from the demand curve, right? It's separate. Where on a perfect competitive market, we would see if this demand curve is equal to average revenue is equal to marginal revenue. But for a for a monopoly or an oligopoly too, that's not the case. We can see that there's a separate, more steep marginal revenue curve, and so the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost occurs at QM, and then because monopolies have pricing power, they set the price higher at PM, and they capture this supernormal profit of PM minus PC times M, right? Times QM. And so this supernormal profit is beneficial to the producers because normally in a perfectly competitive market, you can make positive profits, you can make supernormal profits, and so this situation benefits the producers over consumers. And it hurts consumers because consumer surplus is shrinking. This kind of shaded orange and blue trapezoid used to, it's not trapezoid, it's like a quadrilateral, used to be captured by the consumer surplus triangle, and now it is not captured by that triangle. And so that's going to be the difference between the two. So the reason that this happens is mostly due to market power, that the ability of a few producers to exist in this market by themselves gives them the ability to control the prices and set them wherever they want. So looking through the answer choices, D is the best answer here. Monopolies and oligopolies benefit producers over consumers because few producers can generally control prices. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor also said D. They said a monopoly is a type of market structure where there's just a single maker in the market who delivers the item which has nearly no nearby substitutes available. Being a single seller, the product has full control over the price. A monopolist can fix whatever price it wishes to fix for its product, which benefits producers over consumers, but cannot charge a price that a customer will not be able to bear. Competitive market structure under oligopoly refers to that form of market structure in which there are a few big firms producing a commodity. Each firm has a noteworthy share of the market. Accordingly, the price and output policy of one firm significantly impacts the price and output of rival firms. Oligopoly firms are few, large, dominant firms, and they generally compete with each other on the basis of output, but sometimes this competition can take an ugly side, and firms can start engaging in price wars, which reduces the incentive for consumer. Market power concentration in the hands of a few firms for both monopolies and oligopolies leads to underproduction, higher prices, inefficiency, and price discrimination. Great answer, breaks it down very well. So we can mark that as good and mark this as correct. Next question says that any cost that remains unchanged as output changes represents a firm's A, marginal cost, B, opportunity cost, C, fixed cost, or D, variable cost. Again, a definition question. For our purposes here, you're not going to have to, even if you didn't know definitions, you could probably guess that C, fixed cost, is something that would be the correct answer here. It's a cost that is not dependent on any production value. It's fixed at all levels. And so fixed cost is the right answer here. The producer said that fixed cost as well, and they say during the short run, the producer faces two types of costs. One is the fixed cost, and the other is variable cost. Fixed cost, as the name advocates, remains fixed or constant at every quantity of output produced, i.e. it does not change with the change in the level of output. Fixed costs cannot be changed during the short run. It can never be zero even when production is stopped. Fixed costs are incurred even when output is zero. All right. The next question says, minimum wage creates unemployment in markets where they create a 1, shortage of labor. Minimum wage laws are a predominant reason for unemployment in the United States. 2, shortage of labor. Minimum wage laws are not the predominant reason for unemployment in the United States. 3, surplus of labor. Minimum wage laws are the predominant reason for unemployment in the United States. And 4, surplus of labor. Minimum wage laws are not the predominant reason for unemployment in the United States. Let's break this down. Let's say labor market, minimum wage graph. So we can take this question here. For the labor market, it's important to understand you still have price of labor. It's just like any other good, but the good you're talking about is labor. So you have price. Oh, it's not great. Come on, please. Yeah. Okay. You have the price of labor on the y-axis. You have the quantity of labor supplied and demanded on the x-axis. And so you have your supply of labor given by the number of people who are willing to provide their labor for a certain price. As the price goes up, you can see that more people are willing to work. And you have demand for labor, which is by employers who say the more you make me pay for you, the less people I'll be able to hire. Right? Higher prices, lower demand. And so with a minimum wage law, so without a minimum wage law in the labor market, you would have equilibrium, right? An equilibrium that's intersection of labor supply and labor demand. But if you have a minimum wage law, what that means is you set that above the equilibrium, that's the price floor. You can't have a wage that's lower than that. And this creates a situation in which you have a surplus, right? You have high quantity supply of 50,000 of labor supply and 32,000 labor demand. And so there's this gap between the two, and we could say that there's this minimum wage law creating a surplus of labor. So 1 and 2 are going to be wrong. It's not a shortage, it's a surplus. And so we're left with 3 and 4. The next question is minimum wage law a predominant reason for unemployment in the United States? And most economists would say no, that there's other factors at play. There's business cycle unemployment. There's structural unemployment as a result of labor unions or collective bargaining or efficiency wages. So there's a lot of other reasons. So minimum wage law is not typically seen as the predominant reason for unemployment in the United States. So C, 4 is going to be the right answer. 4 says surplus of labor, minimum wage laws are not the predominant reason. And the previous tutor says a minimum wage defines the lowest price at which a worker must sell his or her labor in the market to employers as guided by the law. No worker shall sell or be compelled to sell their services at a wage lower than the minimum wage for the government regulation is imposed to prevent and enhance the welfare of workers. The imposition of a minimum wage as binding leads to an increase in the quantity of labor supplied and a decrease in the quantity of labor demanded, as a binding minimum wage above the equilibrium represents an increase in the price of labor. As a consequence, a surplus of labor is created in the market as the quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. However, minimum wage laws are largely inadequate and not the predominant reason for unemployment in the U.S. So that's good. And we can mark that as correct. Next question says, when tax revenue exceeds government outlays, the budget 1 is balanced and the national debt is increasing, 2 has a surplus and the national debt is increasing, 3 has a surplus and the national debt is increasing, 4 has a deficit because the national debt is increasing, and 5, none of the above because by law, tax revenue cannot exceed government expenditures. So if we think of government as a business, we know that tax revenue is basically the same as income, and outlays is the same as expenditure. And so the difference between the two will either be a surplus or a deficit. If tax revenue is greater than government outlays, that means the income of the government is more than what they're spending, and so they have leftover money. And that leftover money is what we call a surplus. Okay, what do we do with the surplus? That goes into paying off the national debt. And so let's look at the answer choices. So 1 says that the budget is balanced, but if the tax revenue is greater than government outlays, then it can't be balanced. It would only be balanced if they were the same, so it's not 1. 2 says it has a surplus and the national debt is increasing, so they're correct that there is a surplus, but they're incorrect the national debt would increase if you have a surplus. If you have a surplus, you're paying off the debt, that's a decrease in the debt. So 3 looks like what we're looking for, there has a surplus and the national debt is decreasing. We can take a look at the other answers. 4 says it has a deficit, that's wrong. A deficit would imply that outlays exceed tax revenue, not the other way around. Implying 5, none of the above because by law, tax revenue cannot exceed government expenditures, and that's not true. So 3 is the best answer here. Has a surplus and the national debt is increasing. And the previous tutor said that the national debt, also known as public or government debt, is the accumulation of all budget deficits, i.e. the differences in government revenues and expenditures of different years. If tax revenue exceeds government outlays, the government will have an excess of funds that can be used to pay a portion or entirety of national debt. This surplus allows a reduction in the national debt. And that's a good answer. And I think it's the last question we have for today. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. I'm sorry for some of the technical difficulties we had today. Other than that, I hope everybody's staying safe, and I'll see you guys again next week.